Hey everyone, Sean and Chris here coming at you from the Rocklands Farm Tasting Room on a chilly December afternoon. So what we wanted to do is introduce you to a few of the new releases, two of which are featured in your wine club pack this quarter. So hopefully you've already gotten those or are about to get them. But we just wanted to share some stories and some technical data about these two new reds and just share them with you, our club members, who are the backbone of everything that is really going on here at Rocklands. And so we can't say it enough, but we're so appreciative, especially in this season of reflection and Thanksgiving, of all that you do for us and all that you've created these opportunities to be creative and have make a living doing what we love. And so we're so thankful for that.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is just kind of a thing that some club members and really just folks that come here might not know, but Sean and I have taken over the winemaking in the 2023 and 2024 vintage, so the past 2 years. And so we're relatively new to this. We've been around it, since really the beginning of the winery. We've been around the winemaking and participated in it. But it's really, again, kind of echoing Sean, it's like through your support, where we had an opportunity to take over the winemaking and just be more intimately involved with it and kind of have our own influence on it. It's really just through the support of you all, and oftentimes when we're making the wine, we're like thinking about you. We're thinking about specific club members, and really it's like oftentimes like are they gonna like this? Are they not gonna like it? You're who we're thinking of when we're making these wines. And yeah, it's through your kind of like open-mindedness and willing to try new things, that gives us that like courage to do what we're doing.
Absolutely, and it goes without saying, we love seeing your faces. I know not everyone lives locally in the area, but if you are visiting Rocklands, we just encourage you. It doesn't need to be on a day that we're doing a barrel tasting or a day that we're doing a tour or whatever, but just say, hey, Sean or Chris, there's anyone in the back, could say hi, and we would love to have you taste you on a few of the wines. Just do like a fun little back of the house in the winery tasting and tour. And so we love that kind of stuff, especially during harvest. So what we're gonna do here, we got two new wines. We're gonna taste them here live with you and talk about them, and hope these can find a spot at your tables over the holidays and beyond. So we're gonna start out with this Merlot and Tannat blend from estate grown grapes from the 2023 vintage. So for better or for worse, I mentioned it a little bit in the emails leading up to the wine club, but the name here is a little bit of I guess it's an homage to our endless winery abbreviations and acronyms and things like that, and maybe a little bit to our lack of creativity in this very moment, to be completely honest. But this is what you would see if you walked into the winery on these barrels. While these barrels were in the aging process, it would say MRL-T, signifying Merlot and Tannat.
Yeah, just a funny story on this name and the label. Oftentimes we spend a lot of time deliberating on the names of the labels, and kind of like Sean had mentioned, alluded to, many of us on staff were kind of on a retreat and Sean was not partaking in that retreat because he was busy at home and he needed to get these labels sent off to the label maker in a set amount of time, and was having difficulty reaching us, and we were not in the brain space to come up with a good name. So it was a very spur of the moment decision, just being like, all right, like just call it MRL-T and just be done with it. And then many of us just went into a lake and didn't think about it again until it came out. Funny.
Yeah, right. This is smelling very fruity. So this is tell you a little bit about the wine. So we made 6 barrels of this, so it's about 147 cases is the production, so pretty small even for us. Both of these are 2 of our earlier harvested reds here at Rocklands, Merlot being, generally speaking, in most years the earliest. and then Tanat, in this case, coming 8 days later. So we put the harvest dates here on the bottle on the style label, so it's kind of cool. But this wine, we decided really after we harvested the Merlot that these two grapes, we wanted to marry them together from the very beginning. And so the reason behind that was, I mean, historically they do both hail from the same area of France, in the south of France. Even though we had not done a co-fermentation specifically of these grapes here in the past, but that led us to think that this would be a nice match. But it's kind of like, this is like a classic case of one grape kind of supporting the other's weaknesses and complementing themselves, and that's kind of what we were going for here. So Merlot it gives a lot of fruitiness here on our site. It's that early harvest. It's usually not very tannic, and it can also be like a little flat in terms of the palate, in terms of the acidity. And so we generally, in a lot of cases, we don't go over the top with extraction, because we're extracting more of like this like a little bit less structured wine. Tanat, on the other hand, can carry a lot of tannin that our Merlot tends to lack, and also acidity, but on its own can often be a little bit one-dimensional. And so, I mean, again, we're talking very specific about our site and our experience with it. And so we kind of felt like those two would pair well with one another. And also from like the grape chemistry standpoint, keep in mind, we're working in this low intervention philosophy. And so what that means is that the fermentations are starting spontaneously. We're not adding yeast. Oftentimes we're not adding sulfites, and if we are, it's in very little doses. So the margin for error in terms of like making or breaking a wine is pretty slim for us here. But when you do it well, and when the fruit is good quality, we do it that way because we really think it makes for a better, more delicious wine, but also can give a clearer picture of where it's coming from. And so marrying these two together, it was more favorable for the grape chemistry, the pH, the acidity of the wine, the alcohol level of the wine, and it gave us a little bit of more of a leg up to make this wine in this low intervention style.
Yeah. Taste it.
So yeah, it's weird. It's like interesting because it's a light wine in terms of, the color is relatively light. It's kind of this like, I don't know, how would you describe that color?
I don't know, like not quite like violet, but yeah, just super light red.
Yeah, and it's just 11.2% alcohol, but it's got like meaningful tannin to the wine. And this was actually one of our longest macerated wines, so the longest time that it was on the skins on average in the 2023 year. It probably ended up being about 3 weeks total, because the Merlot came on, we cold soaked that for about a week until the Tanat was harvested, and then we combined the two lots and co-fermented it from there. And I think it was about another 2 weeks on the skins with the two together.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the tannins. It's light, and I think the tannins are like, they're not like super astringent. I mean, you can tell there's body there, but it's like a very like clean mouthfeel kind of tannin, where it's not that long aged. I mean, it's only been aging for 10 months in barrel, and then however many months before it was bottled, but just a couple more months more. But it still has this feel of like kind of like this like rounder, just very, very round mouth feel. I think super enjoyable. Yeah, and just taste wise, just kind of these like lighter, fresher red fruit notes. I get this kind of like piney kind of, maybe it's just like the season we're in of like holidays, but it does kind of give off this kind of like holiday cheer type vibe. It's kind of like pine needle resin notes.
You're so much better at the tasting notes than I am. I get like bistro wine vibes from this, and what I mean by that is that it's like pretty like a crushable wine. I mean, you could and part of that is the lower alcohol. It's very drinkable, but it's also not overly simple in the fact that like I would really prefer this probably with a little food. Not the heaviest of foods, you know. It's on the lighter to medium bodied red category, but yeah, really happy with how this turned out.
Yeah. So Sean had mentioned, this like week-long cold soaking of this Merlot, and I would say partially it was, partially intentional because we had this idea of keeping it on skins and wanting to co-ferment it with the Tannat, but also I guess in a way like kind of like unintentional, where I think had we gone into so much of our decision making is dictated by the fruit itself and like when it's ready and kind of these like external environmental factors. I'm sure there was rain somewhere in that 1 week time period between the Merlot and Tannat, because otherwise, had we known that we were going to co-ferment this from the beginning, I think they would have been harvested closer together on the same day. But I think it also just goes to show, so much of what we do, we want control partially in ways, but so much of our philosophy and what we do is kind of like giving up control. And we don't have control over when rains are going to happen. We have control over when we're going to pick. But sometimes it's like, oh, we wish we could have picked this a week later, or we wish we had picked it, a week earlier. But I think that's one of the more fun aspects and kind of a surprise. This wine, I don't think we knew necessarily the turnout of what was going to happen. Again, partially because this is our second year making wine together in this manner, but also, this is, I would say, just a super pleasant surprise of kind of this like unknown that we were going into. And yeah.
Well, it's kind of like what you're saying. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of like recipe winemaking. We have developed these lanes of wines, and of course, like our estate vineyard here, we want that to speak as loudly as possible, but still, retaining a little bit of flexibility when it comes to, we're not going to force something into a style or into a certain label if that's not the best thing for those grapes. So in this case actually, I mean, this fruit historically, a great example of that is this fruit historically has gone into a Montevideo blend, and we felt that the fruit was not in that neighborhood. It wasn't what we want the Montevideo to be. Again, it's not necessarily like the quality was bad or anything, but it was just not destined for that. It wasn't telling us that it wanted to be in that wine. And so this wine and another wine in particular, the Anjou in mind, a lot of times in past years, those grapes have gone from our estate vineyard and made their way, at least a portion of them, into the Montevideo label. But in 2023, we kept them apart and vinified them differently. So we're trying not to throw too many of these exceptions to the rule at you every year, because it can be a little tricky to follow. But yeah, this is 2023 MRL-T, Merlot Tannat. So and it's also unfined and unfiltered, but you really wouldn't know. Like, it's not one of those unfiltered wines where you like look at it in the glass and it's very cloudy. It's actually like very clarified. The 10 months in barrel, and there's very, very little sediment, if any, in this wine. And then for all you nerds out there, this did see a 30 ppm addition of sulfites right at the bottling, but otherwise there's no additions to this wine. All right, moving on. The new vintage of the Sandstone. Lots of stories about this one.
Yeah, I guess I'll just start kind of with like the story behind it. This wine, the grapes in this is 100% Cab Franc, coming from a good friend of ours. His name is Matt Harsh, in Washington County, kind of right outside of Hagerstown. He has a vineyard and fruit farm called 78 Acres. I'm sure we could talk days about Matt, but he's an incredible grape grower and fruit farmer.
Well, in our fruit.
Oh yeah, true. But I would say, the story behind this, kind of the the hardships behind this wine, I think, is quite humorous at times. But usually, when we are receiving in fruit, kind of the name of the game is get that fruit processed as fast as possible. You don't want to be sitting on fruit for too long without processing it. So this fruit came in, I believe, the day before, and in the harvest season and kind of at crush time, it's just priorities, right? What needs to be done first, and you have to get through it. But this fruit had been sitting for a day, and it was kind of towards the end of the day where I don't recall exactly, but I do recall it was towards the end of the day. I'm sure there was other fruit that had to be pressed or other fruit that had to be processed. And we knew what we wanted to do with the style of putting these berries kind of as like whole cluster type, like a whole cluster, carbonic maceration type fermentation. And we were like, okay, this is going to be great. We're going to leave it towards the end of the day, and at the end of the day, we're just going to take these bins that they're called macro bins that we contain the grapes in, and we're just going to get a forklift in there in the winery. We're just going to dump it into this big old tank and just be done with it, with max take 1 hour, maybe 2 hours. To process and clean all that, or to dump the fruit in and clean and just be out of there. I'm sure at this point, I think it was like 6 or 7 at night, and we were just like, all right, we're gonna get home by 9 p.m. and it's gonna be great.
Right.
We quickly realize that the forklift is not gonna make the fruit is not gonna dump into this bin the way that we thought it was.
Wasn't there.
Yeah, the clearance wasn't there, and we were just like, both looking at each other stunned. Like, what does this mean for our night? How are we going to get this fruit in? And we went through all the options and realized there's no way. There's nothing we can do other than hand scoop every single macro bin. These macro bins contain about 1,000 pounds of herb.
About 20 pounds at a time.
Yeah. 20 pounds at a time.
I think we had 6,000 pounds of fruit. Or no, 8,000 pounds of fruit. I think it was 4 tons.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It seemed it was a lot. So we were each taking turns lifting ourselves up into to the top of this very tall tank and hand scooping one at a time, 1 5-gallon bucket at a time, all of that fruit. What was the total fruit tonnage?
I think that was just over 4, so it was about 8,000 pounds in that lot.
Yeah.
I just remember, we started pretty early that day, and I was listening to the radio on the way into work, and it was like the 6 a.m. morning show. And I remember when we left that night, or that morning, the next 24 hours later, I was listening to the exact same radio show on my way home.
Yeah.
And that's when it really hits you. It was like, wow, that was a long day. I mean, you're used to long days at harvest, but I think that was the longest of 2023.
Yeah.
It's always funny with wine, you're like, these things happen, and then you don't really like rehash it until like a year later, or even more. Yeah, even more, later. Just because there's so much stuff going on. Yeah, there's no time to process.
Totally.
So I think that's really like our first time processing it, so it feels good. I think my therapist would be happy about that. So a little bit more about the wine. Like Chris said, this this is a blend of 2 sites, 2 lots. The majority of it, about 75%, comes from Matt's site, his Cabernet Franc. We love working with his Cabernet Franc. And then the other 25% is actually grown here at Rocklands. So that's about 100 cases worth of this 380 case production wine comes from our Cabernet Franc here, which was aged in barrel, vinified a little bit differently than Chris just described, and the rest was fermented and aged in steel tank, a little more of this anaerobic style that promotes juiciness, a little lower in tannin, and then some of our estate stuff to kind of balance that out, give a little bit of a different expression. This fruit actually came in, this was like the year, it's really been 2 seasons in a row, but they were so dry, and Matt's vineyard in particular, that the fruit, I've never seen it come in this mature and ripened, and that's not always necessarily a good thing. Like this wine, I think when we had it by itself, the fruit from Matt, the potential or the alcohol was right around 14%. Oh no, we tested, it was 13.8. And you could, it was a good wine. I liked it a lot. But you could feel it. It was a little, aggressive. And ultimately that led to us working in some of our lower alcohol, a little more of this like, fresh style Cabernet Franc, same grape, into that. And when we were doing our blending trials over the winter, so we settled on this being a blend of 2 sites. That's usually not the goal. We love keeping things site specific when possible. But again, it's just like we were saying before with the Merlot we're not recipe winemakers. And so, when we were doing our blending trials and just kind of, weighing kind of the different options, we settled on this. And I have to tell you, I'm really happy that we did. I love how this wine turned out. So it came out, finished at 13.1% alcohol. We should go in for a taste. I mean, it's noticeably darker than the last wine that we had. And it has that classic, I feel like Cabernet Franc for me is one of the easiest wines to blind taste, because there's like really classic signatures to it, especially old world Cabernet Franc, which I think is also a little bit more like in line with the Cabernet Franc that is grown here on the East Coast. And there's this like very classic like bell pepper quality to the wine, a little vegetal, a little green, and you get this, you get that right away with this wine.
Totally. Yeah, like Sean mentioned, definitely this kind of like initial note of this like vegetal, herbaceous, kind of like green bell peppery notes, even a little like kind of like spice, kind of like cloves type note to it.
Yeah, and also this wine has I'm specifically attracted to wines where you drink it and the finish gives off almost like this salty vibe. I call them potato chip wines, because you never eat just one potato chip. And this wine, I get a sensation of that. Like after you swallow it, you will want to have another sip. And those are the best wines.
Yeah,
because
nice. That's a perfect description. Yeah, and then I think after kind of those initial notes, the fruit, and it just really does come out, kind of like when you like breathe out, just those riper red fruit notes, kind of like raspberries and cherries and plummy notes.
Yeah, definitely fruity. I mean, and we like this style so much with the Cabernet, the 2024 vintage, which you all will be introduced to in about a year. That is also in steel. It's a little bit lighter, tasting also really good. Quite different from this wine. Yeah, this one is super fruity, and I think it also has like probably a pretty good like aging capacity to it as well. I mean, there's different levels to this wine that I think would, structural components that would promote it to age, definitely well beyond 5 years. That would be interesting to lay a few bottles down and revisit them in the future.
One just funny story, or just a big relief with this wine before we released it. Actually, it's not this particular wine, but it's the next vintage over. But Sean had a bunch of friends over, one of which was a winemaker in where is he from? Anjou region?
Oh yeah.
Vincent.
Yeah.
Domaine des Cognacs.
Yeah.
And we like blinded him on our Cab Franc, the next vintage, which is sitting in our tent currently, of Sandstone, and we were just like crossing our fingers, like, if this winemaker who is an expert in Cab Franc, and that's what they do in that region, he doesn't say that this isn't Cab Franc, we're in trouble. And we were very relieved that immediately, he was able to pick out that it was Cab Franc. And I think that just again speaks to kind of our desire and our willingness, just our desire to make sure that we're producing wine that's just true to itself. We're not trying to doctor anything up to add our influence or our expectation of what a wine should be, but really just kind of letting the fruit speak for itself. And it's always nice when a winemaker who has generations of experience kind of approves of that.
Yeah,
nice.
Absolutely. So that's it. Again, we're so thankful for you and everything that you do for Rocklands and for us. And let us know what you think of these videos. We love doing them. I think you can maybe comment in the YouTube video. Hopefully that is a channel, or you can also send us an email. Anything that's Cellar Club related, if you just respond to it, I'll get it directly in my inbox. And we just love hearing from you guys. So thanks so much. And if we don't see you, have a very happy holiday, a great Christmas. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Bye, everyone.